Season 2, Episode 12, Roberto Salazar, Learner Profiles 2.
This is the Actual Fluency Podcast, helping you become a better language learner by providing motivating weekly inspiration, as well as top tips and tricks from expert guests. And now, your host, Chris Broholm.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast. This is Chris Broholm, as per usual. Today is a little bit unusual because I'm recording this episode live from Budapest in Hungary, and I always wondered about this, recording it live. Well, if it's recorded, is it still live? But anyway, it's I'm recording it here from Budapest, and that might be why the audio quality is a little different than what you're used to. It's a little bit roomy here. The apartment is a little there's a lot of space to the ceiling, so it could be a little echoey, but hopefully not as much. So I just wanted to take a minute before today's episode with Roberto to just update you on what's been going on. And, I was coming to Hungary for the polyglot workshops with Alex Rawlings and Richard Simcott, and a few other people I was aware would be going. And I have a really great episode lined up for you for next week, which is going to be all about the workshop. I've got some live interviews on the spot with people who participated, but I also talk a little bit with Richard and Alex about the general concept and what they hope people can get out of it. So look out for that next week. And the interesting part about my stay here in Budapest is that actually I was meant to take a flight for Berlin after I stayed here a week. But as it turned out, I really like this place, and yeah, I was really fascinated by Hungarian as well. I've heard it before back in Denmark, and I just really like the sound of it. It's very unusual. It's so unusual that you kind of just want to learn it, really. And so that's why I decided to stay, and even missing out on my flight to Berlin. And there are a few more reasons to why I stayed instead of going to Berlin, and I'd love to write about those in an upcoming blog post, just so you can get a kind of an idea of what actually I base my decision on. Because it sounds, when I say it like this, it sounds a little bit like impulsive. Oh, you just stayed. You didn't move on to Berlin. But I'm here in Budapest now, and I'm trying to find an apartment. And I just thought I'd update everyone, as I often get questions to where are you and what are you up to. So yeah, I'm in Budapest right now, and I'll of course keep doing the podcast and the blog, and everything's going to go just as normal. It's just going to be a little bit more difficult for me, but no complaints. Everything can go out. I'll do, if everything fails, I just go to the Starbucks down the road, and I can use their Wi-Fi. So as always, thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, comments, feedback, just send me an email on chris@actualfluency.com, or you can also use the form on actualfluency.com up top. And I'd love to hear from you. And this is the second episode of the Learner Profile series, which is a sort of topic that I always wanted to do specific episodes about, but never really had the idea to do it as a sort of theme. And the idea was that I think people, particularly the language learning community, have incredibly interesting stories, personal stories, or sort of experiences learning languages. But there usually in an episode, there isn't enough time to sort of go into the backstory and the detail, because we have to talk about software they've created, methods they've designed, some kind of theme that they have as their signature story, or whatever you can say. So there hasn't been enough time to sort of take it one step back and go, hey, how do you actually learn languages? And what did you do? And how did you get into it? So that's why the Learner Profile series comes into it. It's sort of a basic, down-to-earth, inspirational series, because the people I interview, they might have learned 5, 7, 20 languages, and they're just talking about the experiences they've done along the way. And this information is quite, invaluable in a way, because you kind of have to, if you don't hear it from anyone, you have to make all the experiences yourself. And that's actually also the basis of the polyglot workshops. It's inspiration and motivation. So yeah, look out for that next week. And for this week, Roberto Salazar and I are going to have a little chat about his learner profile. But before that, I just wanted to take a quick moment to have a message from our sponsor, the Mellow Method.
Mellow Method is the learning revolution since 1995. Now, you can make your dream of living your passion for languages real. Do you want a method that really teaches you a language? What if you could have your own school and get success teaching your students perfect lessons, 100% focused on conversation? Even if you have no experience, Mellow Method will work where other methods can't. With Mellow Method, you will overcome the speaking barrier from Lesson 1. Jimmy Mello, the Brazilian polyglot, has created the best method to teach any foreign language. It's now available in 11 languages from English to Spanish and Brazilian Portuguese, including Mandarin and Polish. Be a polyglot with Mellow Method. Access right now www.mellowmethod.com and reach your goals with Mellow Method, the best method ever created to teach and learn any language.
All right, we're back on another episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast. And today with me, I've got one of my great friends in the polyglot community, Mr. Roberto Salazar. And today we're going to hear about how he gets started with language learning and a lot more. So, Roberto, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm great. How are you doing?
Fantastic. I thought you were going to say saluton for a second.
Oh, no, almost. I almost wanted, but lately it's mostly Latin in my head. So
fantastic. We're going to get into that in a moment, of course.
Cool.
But it's just our little inside joke because we went to a Esperanto weekend course together, and we did well there, I thought.
Yes.
But then
yes.
half a year later, everything's kind of forgotten, and so saluton was all we could manage.
But now every time I said yes, it's actually not an English yes, but an Esperanto yes.
Oh, right. Yes, of course.
Oh, right.
Fantastic. So, Roberto, I don't even know how many languages you speak now, but maybe go back to the beginning. How did you get into foreign languages? And
Sure.
Give us your background.
Sure. So basically, I've really started learning languages. I've been actually learning for the last 5 or 6 years, but the first language I learned was French, and it was when I was a child of 3 or 4 or something. I was at a French school actually in Colombia, where I'm originally from, and I learned the language because my mom wanted me to be. She doesn't speak any other languages, so she absolutely wanted me to be multilingual, and I guess it didn't backfire, but it was like she wanted for me to have like a single weapon, and now it's like a bomb, but. But so I started there with French, then I learned English at school as well a little later. And then I had the choice between Latin and German. And I've always been crazy about mythology and ancient Greek and Latin. But I actually chose German because for some reason I just thought, I will learn it eventually, Latin. It's been my purpose my whole life, so I will get to it at some point. So let's do German, and that's what I did. And actually, what happened was that when I got, I finished high school in Colombia. I got a scholarship, and I came here to France, in Paris, where I will live now, and I started learning Latin and Greek in what we call here École Prépa. So it's a kind of university, a kind of college, and after that. I don't know if it was the fact that I was learning 2 languages, very hard languages at the same time at a very intensive level. But afterwards, I just felt drawn to new forms of language. So when I was done with my École Prépa, I had the opportunity at my school, at my university, to learn, to have a lot of different courses in like Swedish, Arabic, Italian, Portuguese, and a couple more, and I just went with it, and I said, well, okay, I have the opportunity, why not? I've always been like somewhat good at it, so let's try it. And thing is, after 4 or 5 years of doing that, I've just slowly become a real polyglot in some sorts, and cool. I'm really pleased with that. Yeah.
So that's where you are now, in Paris, and speaking a dozen languages and living the polyglot life.
Exactly. And it was like I had a lot of motivation from the internet community, and every time I saw a video by, Richard Simcott or Luca, I was like, oh man, I really wish I was like that. I really wish I could speak like those people, all those many languages that fluent, and it would be great to travel and go to the countries I'm interested in. I love communicating with people in different languages. So yeah, now I'm here after living a year in Berlin, of course, where I met all these wonderful people from the Polyglot Gathering, among
Fantastic.
which you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just one thing. It seems like something is brushing against your
Oh.
microphone.
Oh.
So
Yeah.
if you just check that so people don't go crazy back at home thinking,
Yeah. Yeah.
what's going on?
No, I don't. Oh, yeah. I don't know. I think it's. Is it gone?
Yeah, there's nothing now. So I don't know what you were doing before. Maybe you were moving a little bit or something. It's
Yeah.
fine
Maybe.
now. It's fine now. It's
Okay.
fine
Cool.
now.
I'll try not to move.
Yeah, so I met you at the were you at the last year's gathering?
I was, but we didn't meet there.
No, it was at the
Uh,
Esperanto weekend.
right. Exactly.
So
Exactly.
what made you go to the Esperanto weekend?
Actually, I had become friends with two guys who organized it, Judith and Chuck, and they just offered, said, like, why don't you come? Don't you join us and learn a little bit of Esperanto?
Right.
We'll be able to speak to more people next year at the gathering. And I said, well, okay, why not? Let's try it. And it was really wonderful.
Yeah.
Actually, I met a lot of people from the gathering after the gathering, since I was living in Berlin. So a lot of people stayed a little bit longer.
Right.
Some people came afterwards. And Judith and Chuck were still organizing a couple of events. Like I had the opportunity of meeting Richard at one of the polyglot dinners, and I ended up working for him incidentally.
Cool.
Yeah,
That's a happy ending.
yeah, it was
But
cool.
but it must have been also a bit of a fairy tale in a way when you came
Oh
from
yeah.
watching the videos on YouTube. Do you think that the videos when you were watching them, did you think that changed something in your mind, or did it just boost what was already sort of burning from earlier?
Well, I think it works. It was more like, yeah, they boosted my like my motivation, because you often think, okay, yeah, I'm pretty good with German and English, but that's enough. And then you see these monstrous, incredible guys who can just switch between 10 or 20 languages, and you say, wow, I can't do that, and I obviously need to work a little bit more to get to a point where I can just share in the experience, in the whole experience. And then you go from watching the videos to actually having dinner with these people. And actually, the first time we had dinner together, there were a lot of people, Judith and Salvatore, and a lot of very interesting guys. But among them were Richard Simcott and Alexander Arguelles. So it was like, and it was just between them. So I could hear them talking. I listened to the conversations, and they switched like in 10 minutes. They switched at least between 7 or 8 languages,
Wow.
and it was just fascinating and exciting.
That gives a motivational boost. You want to be
Right? It's
that-
crazy.
That's where you want to be. So how? And also one thing I want to talk about actually is from the what really stood out to me about that Esperanto weekend was how quickly you adapted it, because
Yeah.
you didn't really study it before the weekend, and it wasn't really a sort of a class. There was no real
Yeah.
tutoring. It was just like everyone was just thrown in at the deep end,
Right. Right.
and we had lots of sort of downtime. And it seemed like you were sort of quiet for maybe a few hours from the first day, and then
Yeah.
you just started talking all the time in Esperanto.
Right.
So how did that feel from you? Because obviously you must have some kind of a nice ear for assimilation in language learning, or can
Yeah.
you-
I guess that's it. In a way, I really need to have like I have developed a couple of techniques that are not really, well, I think they're good techniques, but are not that developed. So I've been working on a couple of things, and I always like do a list of important words, and then try to work from there, like in a very fast way. Like I usually when I, for example, use Asimal, I read the first 10 or 12 lessons to just get the main vocabulary out of it. Then I do like a list, and then I practice creating sentences with those phrases. And at that point, at the Esperanto group, everybody was well, not everybody had a very good level, so they were using very basic sentences all the time. And I just listened a little bit and then asked what the words meant, and then we had this little booklet of basic
Right.
Esperanto, and I tried to work with that. But the thing is, since in Esperanto there's a lot of Latin words and a lot of Spanish and French words, and the structure is actually very simple. It was for me like speaking very easy kind of Latin, because you don't have any declensions, you have very basic conjugation, so the words are really easy to memorize because I already know a lot of different Latin words, and then you just have to improvise with that.
Right.
And you can. And the advantage is that what I really lack in everyday conversations with other people from, I don't know, Sweden or Italy or Portugal, I don't know, is that everybody would correct you every time you said something wrong.
Right.
So you'll have like a repetition all the time, and you know how to correct your mistakes, and you could ask anybody.
Do you think that's a good idea? Like if you're, let's translate it into a tutoring scenario where let's say I booked an Esperanto tutor online, and I had a level where I could sort of speak, but had sort of lots of mistakes here and there. Do you think it's helpful, beneficial to get corrected on every mistake, or should you speak fluently and then afterwards the teacher can say, well, it was good, but you had a little bit of problems with this, this, and this?
Right. I think it's a very difficult topic. It's a very difficult question actually, and it was more or less there was a very good reply to that question on Alex Rawlings' blog about not tutoring but having a tandem.
Right.
Because it's also what happens in tandem. And what Alex said was that it was important that the person who knows the language, well, I mean the person who speaks the language you want to learn, it was important for them to to write down the words or like the mistakes and to tell you afterwards what you did. But I think a tutor, since it's a tutoring situation we're talking about, should know what the important mistakes are, and should know when to point them out. I mean, not every single mistake should be pointed out immediately, but like very strategic, like very repetitive mistakes, you should tell people from the start. And if it's a recurrent mistake, you should keep on coming back to it, because if you don't, you will not be able to remember what you're getting wrong. Right. But I mean, not all the time. The situation, like I mean, the Esperanto group was different because there's a very different. You have two very different situations. The first one is a one-to-one conversation, like tandem or a tutoring, where you have very limited information coming to you and coming from you. But when you're surrounded, like that's situation number two, you're surrounded by people, and you're in an immersion situation. Then you have lots of information coming to you from all sides, and you really need to get a hold of very important things. Sorry, I'm being attacked by my lungs.
Don't worry about it.
I've had to talk a lot. I've spoken a lot in the last few days, but so you have a lot of information, and you can like get inside this large group of people. You can get into smaller conversations, into larger conversations, and then you need to be reactive all the time. So it's better in those situations. It's easier to correct people more often.
Right. When you're in a small one-to-one, maybe.
Yeah.
And it's also, I guess, about just the brain. If you get the same correction often enough, you'll kind of learn it, and if you don't get it at the time of you making the mistake, it's hard for the brain to sort of go in and fix it retroactively. So the reason I ask is because I've been doing a lot of Russian tutoring sessions, and there's a lot of mistakes you can make in Russian.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So what ended up happening was my tutor would correct me on every mistake, And I did this for months, and I was like, I like this because then I fix a little bit of it at a time.
Yeah.
And then I was watching some videos from, I think it might have been Benny, or I'm not sure who it was, but they were saying like, yeah, you should just focus on speaking, and the tutor should only really correct you if it's sort of not understandable.
Yeah.
And so I was just wondering what your take was on it, but it seems like you also like the constant corrections if you're in a one-to-one situation.
Yeah. The problem is that you have, I mean, it can be very frustrating to be corrected in every sentence because you say like, oh no, I really suck at it, and
Right.
I make mistakes all the time. And if you get corrections all the time, you also feel you're like maybe losing a little bit of your money there because it's like, yeah, I want to learn new stuff, but if it keeps correcting me, I will not get to the things I want to learn. So I think you have to find like some kind of harmony in
Right.
that, like not too much correcting, but still a fair amount that can allow you to see that how much you still have to learn.
Yeah, and I would say if people are learning Russian out there or want to learn it, I would just say expect a lot of corrections and
Right, absolutely.
don't let it kick you out because there's so many things that every word you can make a mistake. So
Yeah,
don't think that it translates to you being useless in the language. It's simply just the complexity of I can't do the math right now, but if you multiply like 5 cases with 3 genders with a lot of
yeah,
different endings, then you have hundreds and hundreds of scenarios that
yeah.
just take a lot of time to memorize. So
Sure.
it's going to take time. But then again, as long as people understand you, even if you use the wrong case or gender or whatever, then it's usually okay, I would say, as a language learner to continue. But obviously, with Russian specifically, it can be a problem because the
Sure.
case sort of dictates, who does what,
Yeah,
and
yeah, but
so
I think the main thing would be like if you take what Benny said, which is also somehow what Luca says every time he talks about I don't know what he calls that, but it's you should not focus on specific words and specific mistakes on specific words, but rather on the rhythm of a sentence and in being understandable at we pedantically know as at the suprasegmental level. So you really have to say like you have to try and speak as naturally as you can and try to say aloud long sentences, and then you'll be understood. But if you keep on hesitating on small words, you'll be corrected all the time because you don't seem really self-assured. And the
right.
important thing is just to not to fake it really, but just to fake it a little bit so that people are convinced that you speak the language a little bit better than you do, but not too much.
Right, just
Because
speak, I
then,
think, is a
yeah,
big point because if the thing is, if you sit and think about every word, you can't speak fluently.
yeah,
And even if you don't know the correct way to say a word, just say whatever comes to your mind and
yeah,
just focus on getting words out and start speaking. And then that's the only way you can correct it. If you think,
yes,
oh no, what's the plural genitive for this word?
yeah, no,
Just don't worry about it. Just speak what you think it is, and then you'll
exactly,
be
yeah.
corrected afterwards because
And that's what you actually notice. For example, I noticed that in Germany when in Berlin, you meet a lot of foreigners who are learning German, and there are sometimes people who speak very fluently, and they make a lot of mistakes, and sometimes are corrected, but they're so sure of themselves when they use the language that they're only corrected when it's really necessary.
right.
But if they make a like a normal mistake and use another word like a French or German or Italian or English word instead of the German version of the word, it's okay. So you will learn with some more time. You'll learn how to use the correct word, but people will not focus on the fact that you need help with learning the language, and they will just correct you when it's really needed.
Yeah, and maybe you're not in a language correction scenario anyway.
Exactly. Exactly.
Maybe
Yeah.
you're just talking on the train and they
Exactly.
they're confident, but my German is also pretty good, but I know that I
Mhm.
make a lot of case mistakes,
Sure.
mistakes. But I still get understood, so it doesn't make sense for me to put up a block in my mind saying, "Oh no, I'm
No.
making mistakes all the time," because that'll just slow me down,
Yeah,
and it will halt the actual good conversations that I can have.
sure.
And if people are like, sorry, what did you mean by that? I can just explain what I mean,
Right.
And the German case system is a little stupid anyway.
Yeah.
It's not as brilliant as the Russian one, but
Yeah, absolutely.
anyway, that's for a different story, I would say.
Yeah.
So, Roberto, what's the secret to learning languages?
Whoa, that's a very tough question. Of course, everybody will say that it's dedication. You really need to have at least some discipline. You really need to be you really need to go back to your languages often, if possible, every day, and not well. You often get frustrated, but the important thing is to keep motivated and to go back to your languages all the time. You need to live the languages, and live them. Try to use them as much as you can in your everyday life. Like earlier, I wouldn't dare go and buy my shawarma in Arabic, and now I find myself doing it more often. Especially since I went to the gathering, because I had the opportunity of speaking a lot of Arabic, which I never do. And then afterwards, I just went to the shawarmas in Berlin, and just ordered in Arabic. And people often take it very, very well. I mean, you say, "Oh, it's good that you're learning Arabic. Let me help you," and they're pleased with that because it shows how interested you are in their culture, and so I guess it's really a question of motivation, but you also need to adapt to a good method that suits you. I mean, a lot of different tips and tricks can work for anybody, but you really have to find a routine that works for you.
Right. And what have you been finding works great for you? Maybe something that's changed from when you started the first independent
Yeah.
language to now. Has there been any big changes in that department? Any aha moments?
Yeah, well, I think, for example, I try not to follow, like for example, when I use the Asimov method, I try not to follow the rules perfectly. Like Asimov should have like a very passive. Uh, you need to do a passive version of the book at first. Just try to understand, and then just afterwards, after lesson 50, go to the active part. And I think that for me, it's better to just start with the active language from the start. And now what I do is I really like to make a list of the main syntactic features of a language. Like from the start, I don't want to. I don't think that the best thing is to start with the easiest parts of the language, because in everyday life and in everyday conversations, you don't really use the simplest parts of language, but rather very complex sentences. So sometimes I will go and if I tackle a new language, I will just start. I would take a grammar, for example, and go to the complex sentence part and see how it works. How do you say I want to do something? How do I say I can do something? So I often go to what in English you'd call the modal verbs, and I learn the modal verbs, and then I learn how to link those verbs to another part of a sentence. And that allows me to have a better, I don't know, like intuitive knowledge of the way the language works.
So go in and check out some grammar specifically for the
Right.
modal verbs. Oh, that's
Yeah, or
interesting.
just go online and look like I don't know, if you're learning German, you go like, well, German's like a kind of a nightmare, but you go and like subordinate clauses in German, and you try to see how it works. You don't need to learn it; you just need to see how it works and which are the main words, like the important words in building a subordinate clause. And if you don't get at first that you have to the syntax is works the other way around in subordinate clauses. Like in German, you would say, ich bin gekommen, weil ich das tun musste, and you put the verb at the end. If you don't get that at first, it's not a big deal. Once you speak to a German, they will correct you.
Right, exactly.
But if you know what the words are and how to build a more complex sentence from the start, you will be able to have more interesting conversations, even the first time you use the language.
Right.
And not just get stuck with the "Hi, my name is Roberto. I come from Colombia." which really annoys me. And every time I go to the polyglot, not the polyglot gathering, because that's a different level, but to the polyglot club here in Paris or in Berlin, but in Berlin it's not that horrible. You spend 2, 3, 4 hours, 5 hours just introducing yourself like 20 times in English,
Right.
German, and it's annoying.
It's, you want to speak some interesting sentences.
Yeah, and then you just sometimes you just have to just like start on start talking about a topic that doesn't have anything to do with introductions. Like for example, hey, what's your favorite color? Or are you a dog or a cat person? And those things that often, languages are very intimate stuff. So if you speak about intimate, not too intimate, but just mildly intimate stuff, people will notice first that you care about them, and then second that you want to speak about something that really matters,
Right.
not politics, but something that really matters to a person.
Right. That's a cool tip. And what about vocabulary? You mentioned that you took some words and you put them into a list. How do you actually put that list into your head, so to speak?
So I think it would be like the old-fashioned way, but mostly what I do is I take, like, for example, a Swedish list. You know those Swedish lists?
Sweet. No, I
It's
don't
like
think so.
those are like frequency lists.
All
So you have
right.
like the 250 most frequent words in English or in Spanish or anything, and then I read that a couple of times, and then you will often be able to build very small sentences from those words. So you always have like the pronouns I, you, etc. And then you also have a lot of very basic verbs like to do, to be able to,
Drink.
must, to drink, of course, to eat. And then you always have like the word for food or the word for meat or the word for juice or I don't know. And so you start from those things and you try to build small sentences, but always focusing on the important verbs and the basic vocabulary.
So is that the first step, really? It's sort of an interactive way into the language for you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, you really need some interaction, even if it's with yourself. You need to create a situation where you simulate communication with somebody else.
That's interesting because I think a lot of people decide to do a sort of passive way with, let's
Yeah.
say they load up, it could be the same list, they load it up into Anki or Memrise.
Hmm.
Could be the 250 top words in French or
Yeah.
whatever. And, but of course and I think that the SRS, the spaced repetition system, I think it does work, but
Yeah.
I think what you're describing is more efficient because you're sort of activating different parts of the brain at the same time.
Yeah.
And oh, actually, the important thing, I'm not really asking you a question here. I'm just supporting
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
your
Yeah, sure.
technique, because the cool thing is that when you're making the sentences based on the first 250 words or whatever,
Yeah.
you're not only learning the vocabulary, but you're also building sentences that are sort of ready to use.
Yeah. Exactly.
Whereas if I just learned bread, police, eat, car, particularly in casal languages,
Yeah. It's horrible.
It's horrible, right? But even in languages that don't have that problem, like I suppose English,
Yeah.
even in that, it's much better for the brain to learn something in context
Yeah.
than it
Absolutely.
is to learn something just bread. Like, okay, I learned the word for bread. Now, great. What can I say with it? I guess I
Nothing.
can go
Yeah.
into a bakery and say bread, and hopefully they'll give me some. But
Yeah, but that was my problem with German at first because I knew I had done a lot of like 2 years of German in high school and then I stopped because I wasn't doing my prépa, and so I had to keep it going. And at that time I didn't have any good methods and I didn't know anything about language learning. I had just learned English at school. Like French was passive for me because I was 3 or 4 years old, so I just
right,
assimilated it, and it's like my mother language. And English, I was still young, so I could just learn it. But then with Germany, what the problem was that I didn't have anybody to talk to, and I just read a lot of literature because I love literature, and so I read a lot of books, a lot of poems by Goethe and by Rilke. And I noticed that I had a lot of vocabulary because my other students in my school who'd been learning German for 8 or 10 years, but that's also because the French education system is very bad for languages. But yeah, everybody knows that. So I noticed that I had a lot of vocabulary, but I didn't know how to use it. And so it was not until I started with Assimil, which is actually more or less what I do with the Swedish lists, because the first lessons you have very basic vocabulary, very basic sentences, and then the exercises they take the same vocabulary and then change the order of complements and stuff, and they just allow you to build new sentences.
Right.
But I noticed that after doing that, it was much better. So I now, every time I learn a word, I try to have some context of some kind, be it with Google Translate or with in France we have a collection of books called Le mot et l'idée, so word and idea, and it's a list of words. But then at the end of every page, you have sentences built with almost every word in the list on the list. So it's cool. Really useful. Yeah.
That's really cool, and I think it's a great idea for learning vocabulary. And I'm also excited for my next project, it's French. I'm also excited to learn via the Assimil,
Absolutely.
And also to take some of this into practice, because I really think that interactivity really makes a difference. Because I didn't do that much with Russian, but I can, and it took me a long time to get to speaking, like you did with German. So
right.
What do you think about what's your take on when you have to start speaking? How do you prepare for? Do you get tutoring early, or do you just kind of go to a tandem partner, or do you go to the polyglot club? What's it? How do you start practicing the language?
So for most of the languages I've learned, I've had the chance of having like lessons in my university, because we have a lot of. It's a very open school, so to speak, and you can, if you have like 5 or 6 people interested in one language, you can get a course open.
Oh wow!
So I've had the chance of having for almost every language a native speaker as a teacher, with whom I can speak most of the time. You can just raise your hand and talk about the topic you're interested in, or ask him to repeat the pronunciation, etc. And I haven't had that many tutoring opportunities, because I've had these courses. But for example, with Arabic, the problem is that I've studied like a modern standard Arabic I've been studying for the last 4 or 5 years, but the lessons, since it's not really a spoken language, but mostly read, about something that you read or you listen to on TV and radio, you don't really have any actually opportunities with to speak it.
Right.
And so I never use it, and I lose it because of that. So for those languages, I think the thing would be one of the only solutions you have is to go to polyglot meetings, to meet people who want to speak the language with you, and the polyglot club is something that, of course, it's not that good, because there's a lot of people in Paris, especially, who just want to speak French or English. Like tourists want to speak French, and French people want to speak English. But the first thing, because I usually like 3 or 4 years ago, I was very shy and I didn't want to speak. I knew I was good in languages and etc. But I didn't want to use the languages because I was too shy. And after going to 2 or 3 or 4 sessions, since you're really there to speak and you don't have to go through the first like weird stage of going to a person you don't know and telling them, hey, hi, do you want to speak with me? You want to talk to me for a couple of minutes? So you really are able to break that barrier, that shyness barrier, and then it helps a lot. And the first thing is when you see somebody who in a normal situation who speaks the language you want to learn, just surprise them and talk to them in the language, and it will help you every time.
Right. And it gets better and better the more languages you learn, I guess.
Right, absolutely. And people are pleased just to see that. I don't know, like the last time when I came back from Berlin, we landed in Paris at the same time as a group of tourists from Stockholm, and most of them were really confused and they didn't understand how the metro system worked.
Right.
So I just said like, oh, do I dare? Do I dare? And I just went for it and explained to them like the metro system in Swedish, and they were really surprised, and they told me like, but why on earth would you learn Swedish? It's such a small language. Nobody cares about that.
Right.
And but they were happy, you know, they were pleased that somebody would take interest in a culture that is like
Right.
small in comparison to English or French or German, I don't know. And so they're always pleased to speak the language with you.
That reminds me of a funny story when we were trying to get tickets in Berlin.
Yeah.
We were going out for the evening and we wanted to get a train ticket for the S train, the S-Bahn. And
Oh,
there was
yeah.
a group of tourists sort of standing around the ticket machine, and they were
Yeah.
sort of middle-aged, and they looked definitely non-German. And
Yeah.
I didn't really hear what they was. I couldn't hear the language. I couldn't really hear. It was very noisy in the train station, and we'd been waiting for some time. And at some point I just said, Roberto, can you please go and help them, because you probably speak the language, because I know you speak so many languages that chances are you were gonna help them.
Yeah.
And it turned out they were from Greece.
Yeah.
And of course you speak some some Greek, and you were able to sort of help them out.
Yeah, absolutely. That was very fun.
Yeah,
But
so-
then I think they thought, because I think my accent is pretty good, because it's you know, the phonetics of Greek are very close to that of Spanish, and so my accent is good. My language skills are okay, but they're not like, I'm not like perfectly fluent in Greek. So at first I helped them like one time, and then they came back and
Right.
they kept talking to me in Greek, and at a level where I could just pick up some words, and I was still able to help them. But I was like, no, come on, no, I didn't want to give you the wrong impression. I'm not from Greece. I'm not that good. Please slow down.
Right, but it was just great, and it shows you
Yeah.
the sort of what's possible with languages, and
Right, right.
particularly if you live in a city like Berlin or
Oh, yeah.
Paris.
No,
You know,
yeah.
there's tons of people from different cultures, and just the fact that you were able to just jump in there and, you know, understand them and speak the language. It's just really a funny situation. and
Yeah,
it happens
and I
every
felt-
year at the
Yeah, and I felt great afterwards. Like, oh yeah, I was able to help some Greek tourists.
in Berlin.
I'm so happy. Yeah,
And you live
But-
in Paris.
yeah, but the thing is, you know, living in Paris can be like really tough for a language learner, because it's really good. There's a lot of foreigners. There's a lot of people coming here all the time, but there's so many tourists that sometimes you just are too exhausted to speak to them.
Right.
Berlin is a very nice city because everybody is so open, and there's not a lot of people in the streets, so you don't get oppressed by the presence of thousands and thousands of people every day.
Right.
So you really are very pleased when you can meet some foreigners. Here in Paris, it's like, oh, okay, again, no more tourists. Come on, stop.
Right.
Yeah.
I can see that. Another
Yeah.
thing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. But I was just to go on and ranting about Paris. I love
Well,
the city, but yeah.
I think we might do that for another episode called
Right.
Against Paris.
Against Paris. No, it's a great.
This is a
great
nice city,
but
isn't it?
Everybody speaks French. You know, it's a lot of tourists, but everybody tends
A
to
lot of
speak,
French people as well, right?
a lot of French people as well.
They're nice, but we like to take the Mickey out of the French, don't we? So
Right.
that's
Absolutely.
why.
Me
But well, what I wanted to ask you about here on the closing notes is
Sure.
you mentioned you love reading. I just wanted to ask you what do you think about the sort of the importance of reading in your target language, and how do you attack that when you don't know enough to really
Yeah.
when you don't really understand much? How do you actually read early, and how do you actually learn how to read? Because you
Yeah.
can't just you can't just learn like the best 2,000
No.
words
Of
or
course.
something.
Of course.
So how do you go about it?
Well, there's a couple of different techniques. You can start with very easy texts. You can like either you can start with comic books, which are just you can understand the story, but you have very few words per image, and so it helps you a lot because you can get like the meaning from the context, from the drawn context, and then try to improvise with what you're reading. Then there's also children's books, very easy children's books, which are actually made for people who are not still necessarily able to read, so it can help a lot. And then, well, you have also bilingual editions where you can, when you have like a very basic but still pretty good level in like I don't know, Russian, you can read the translation and then try to go back to the Russian text and understand some words and the grammar from the translation,
Right.
which is basically a very advanced form of assimil or teach yourself. Because what you do is exactly the same. You read the Russian text, you try to understand it. If you can't understand it, you go back to the translation, then go back and move back and forth from text to translation, and it helps you in some way. Right. And then another thing is, if you're reading a language that's close to yours, it changes everything. Because, for example, if I have pretty good skills in Portuguese and Italian, but my passive reading skills are much higher, especially because I know Latin. So I can get a lot from reading, which I'd obviously not understand as well if I watched a movie or listen to a text to the read version of the to a version of the text that somebody would read to me.
Right.
And so with languages close to yours, the best thing is just not to stop and keep going and just focus on the words you really don't understand and you really can't get from the context. Because in a language like, especially for the Romans languages, you can get a lot just from reading, and a lot from the context, and a lot from the other words that are, I mean, the thematic context, and also the linguistic context.
Right. So if you pick up a word that you don't understand, do you just add it to a list, or do you look it up? Do you use it in an example sentence? How do you, when you discover a word that you don't know but you think you should know, what do you do to it?
So there's a couple of things you can do. The first one is, if you're not like I'm a very touchy person when it comes to books and paper. So I hate writing on my books. I hate just even with a pen with a pencil I can't. But when I buy like very cheap Swedish like criminal books and detective stories, then I'm not that like in Berlin I bought a lot of Swedish novels for €1, so it's fine. I don't care. So I take my pen and I just underline the main words I don't understand, and then I look them up afterwards. But it's really hard because you really need to go back to the text you've already read and go back through it and look the words up. And you don't need to build new sentences, because if you write down the sentence you already have in the text, you already have context. So it's pretty easy from that
right,
point.
But it is a lot of work, though.
It is a lot of work.
And
it is
a lot of people get. Myself, I know I get demoralized from having to do too much sort of nitty gritty work when I'm just trying to essentially just read a story, right?
Yes. No, I know what you mean, and that's why, for example, Alexander Wells' advice on that particular on topic and reading is not to read like fluently in a language before you can get like 98% of what you of every page, which is really frustrating. But it's not that much. Yeah.
It's a really high level. So
it's a really high level.
If you're not at that level, and I mean, it just seems weird, because how are you going to get to that level if you don't read?
Yeah. I mean, what's important is if you want to read, you just have to buy materials that are adapted to your level,
right.
Like easy stories, or ask a native speaker which books he thinks you can. But that's tricky. But you can still ask if what books do you think are easy to read. For example, it's tricky because in German you could say like, oh yeah, like children's books like the Brother Grimm's stories should be very easy, but they're actually very complex, very literary and intricate stories. So it's not that easy. But you find like children's books or comic books or even these bilingual stories. If you're just too frustrated to go on, you just keep on reading on the French or the English version, and then you go back for a while. That's what I do, because I also get frustrated.
Right.
And like Arguello's 98% is a lot, but it's like in a normal book, it would be like not understanding like 6 or 7 words, which is still a lot. But it's less than when you say 98. You're just you feel like you have to understand almost every word, but you still have a little bit of it's easier than you think. But the other thing is that when you read a lot, it's like when you listen to a lot of radio, but reading is very good because you're fully concentrated on the text. You learn a lot of vocabulary without noticing it because of the context. Because a writer would often use the same words because of his own style. He will appreciate a kind of structure or expression that will come back often in his texts. So you will get at an unconscious level, you will learn a lot.
Right.
But you still have to get to a pretty good level before you can start reading literature, and that's my problem because what I always say is like, yeah, my main purpose when learning a language is to be able to read the great literature that every language possesses. But then once I get to a level where I can read the very good literature every language possesses, I am drawn to another language. So it starts over, and it's extremely frustrating.
Of course, the virtues of a polyglot.
Yeah.
But I think the thing about reading is it's a bit of a grind when you think about it. Like when you open a book and you're still not high level in the language, you have to look up some words, you have to do some things, but the important point is just to consider that it helps a lot, and if you can sort of push yourself to do it, it really does help. And if your goal is to read, then I would suggest reading earlier, before 98%, because I've heard lots of people benefit greatly from doing sort of the read, underline, and look up words they don't understand. It's a lot of work. It's very meticulous, but it also pays dividends. But you have to be made of a special character to just be able to muster that. But anyway, Roberto, I just keep talking. If we might have to do a 10-hour special. No, just kidding.
No.
But we've reached the end of the show for today, and just want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your stories and your tips. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about what's next, and then maybe next gathering, or maybe there's an Esperanto course.
Maybe. Why not? Maybe you will join. I'm trying to prepare like a spoken Latin course.
My God!
Yeah, in Berlin.
Well, you wanted to come back to the podcast and talk about Latin, right? So
sure.
Everyone is going to hear about that very soon.
Cool.
Right,
That would be wonderful.
Talk to you soon.
Yeah, talk to you soon, man.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Actual Fluency Podcast. If you would like to get more out of the podcast, check out the VIP Club by going to actualfluency.com/VIP.